right, we are back. It's No Apologies on Beck. We're bringing in our special guest, John Trandem, out of Fargo. He is the Rules Committee Chair. I believe that's the right terminology. And you are also proxy for District 45. John, longtime, very active member of the Republican Party. And we most often agree, I think. There are times we haven't agreed, but one thing I can say is that you have been a stalwart for the party as the means by which we can best further those principles, those platforms that we have. Yeah. So thank you for being on. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to getting some of your input. So few people are willing to talk to us about it, and that in and of itself is a concern. This sort of lack of being frank, the lack of transparency. We're supposed to be different than that in the party. You were at the meeting. Can you give a little bit of an overview, and then I'd like to ask you about a couple of particulars.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with what you're starting with there, Rick. People need to have more conversations, and when these sweeping rules changes first came out, the first 8 calls that I made were to the newly appointed chairs so that we could have conversations about these, figure out where we agree, where we disagree. And you never know, by the end of those conversations, maybe one of us changed our minds. And what I said to each of those people is I learned a whole heck of a lot more having conversations with people with whom I disagree than shouting into an echo chamber. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and look forward to this conversation.
Yeah. The first one, the easiest one, I think that's able to be identified as a sweeping change is to move the convention, to have moved, because I believe it failed, to have moved the convention after the primary. You indicate in an email, which was extraordinarily well written, that there were several problems with that, but one of which was that the doing that gave a distinct advantage to the person with the most money and the most power. Now, there was pushback from the proponents of this that doesn't make a difference, but I think we all know better.
Well, all we need to do is look at reality on this one. There are several problems. I can't even get into how many problems there are with this proposal, but yes, the primary absolutely favors the person that stuffs the most pieces of glossy card stock into the most mailboxes. And it's unfortunate. And I don't say this with contempt for the voting public in North Dakota. The reality is, though, that in a primary type system, the voters only have access to that information which the candidates provide them. So they don't have an opportunity to engage with and interact with the candidates as we do at conventions. So they get the information, the platitudes on these pieces of glossy cardstock. They say, oh, this guy calls himself a conservative, must be a conservative. This guy says he's pro-life, he must be pro-life. But never have an opportunity to actually engage with those candidates and figure out if their heart is really in it and is really behind our platform. And that's the advantage we have with a convention, is it's really tough to put one over on 2,000 delegates because they're going to ask those tough questions directly. Rick, you remember sitting down with me at the Holiday Inn when you were running for governor. I didn't ask you softball questions.
No, you sure
did. The delegates don't do that, and that's good. And I know you think that's good too. We need to hold people's feet to the fire, and the primary does not give us the ability to do that, where the convention process absolutely does. And this, the example of the 2016 election absolutely demonstrates that the candidate with the most money has an advantage. When you look at Wayne Stenjum, and I don't mind naming names, everyone knows who we're talking about here. You look at Wayne Stenjum, arguably one of the most popular, endearing, long-term Republican candidates and office holders in the history of the state of North Dakota. How did he get defeated? Because he was outspent 7-1. There's not even a question about that, especially when you look at his performance at the convention. And I'm not saying that's good or bad or right or wrong. It's just the fact. And that's unfortunate because I don't think the candidate with the most money is always the best candidate. We don't always want the candidate that can buy the election to be our candidate. Sometimes maybe we do, but I don't think we should have that as our stand.
Right, I agree with you. And the points or the counterpoints that Dawson Schefter brought, which I can only assume came from the governor, is that the idea that the person with the most money has a distinct advantage is incredibly insulting to the voters. But I think that statement is incredibly insulting because, go out and start a campaign for something and tell your campaign manager that you don't need to worry about money. I mean, that's just silly.
Not going to fly. And
Yeah.
the example that they used was Kevin Cramer versus Heidi Heitkamp, but that was a general election example. That was an entirely different scenario where you have one of the highest profile races in the nation in a blood red state like North Dakota. Yeah, Kevin Cramer was outspent by Heidi Heitkamp and he defeated her, but that's an entirely different scenario from a primary election, entirely different, apples and oranges.
I agree.
And a completely different ground game, too. That's what actually tipped it, in my personal opinion, which goes right into CRs and NDYRs, because the fact that Kevin Cramer won was, I think, very much attributable, and Kevin Cramer has said that himself, to the young Republicans.
Yeah, well, yeah, they worked their tails off, and I appreciate that about them. And I heard Daryl the other night in their press conference was commenting about this rules change. We had this proposed at the June roundup meeting. There was a proposal on the table to make them ex officio members of the NDGOP, and it was kind of a meet in the middle type of a proposal, because the reality is most of us knew that the votes were there to take them off as voting members, but we wanted to retain them at least as ex officio members. So when this meeting was noticed, the ex officio non-voting status had disappeared from the proposal, and we had a let's just get rid of them proposal. So I was able to successfully move 2 points on that one. Number one, that if it was passed, it didn't take effect until after the close of the meeting. And number 2, each of these YRs and CRs would be made ex officio non-voting members of the state committee. So they retain the right to at least attend the meetings and continue to learn from the process. So we saved a little bit of ground on that one, but it still went the way that a lot of people anticipated it would.
Yeah, let me ask you, John. I'm just calling things out, and I said last night, it seems to me that it was only a couple of years ago that they said, hey, let's have YRs and CRs, young Republicans, college Republicans, have a vote on the state committee, and now they're yanking it away. And the way I see it is they anticipated that this was a good way to bring young people in, which is so important to a political party, a way to bring them in. But what they found is that the people who came in were not the kind of Republicans that they wanted, and so now they wanted to diminish their influence, certainly by votes on the committee. What do you think of that assessment?
I think you may be right in some instances. I don't think that that's across the board for everyone. I think one of the concerns was that each of these organizations operates autonomously in terms of their elections and so forth. We had a real big debacle with the college Republican election. We had to deal with that at Roundup in June. It was complicated. We had no jurisdiction, no authority over their membership levels, over the way they conduct their elections. So there were multifaceted concerns on that one. And that's why I kind of saw the writing on the wall when we came into that meeting. Things had been a little bit rocky, and it was just the way that it was heading. So I think there's a lot of reasons for it. I don't think that's the only one, but for some people, I think that was a consideration, Rick.
One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is this idea of unity. We keep hearing from the folks that are making the proposals to change the rules that, in my opinion, very much coalesces power to select individuals with a certain vision of how the Republican Party should be, which is status quo. You, in your email, said you hear a lot of other words, too, besides unity, and that is the ultra-right, the extremists, the far-right, the Bastiats. And I appreciate your frankness. Even when I read former Governor Schaefer's email, he's not afraid to mince words, and he does readily show that a lot of this is about protection from the grassroots, protection from those that want to hold elected officials accountable. And I think that is critically important. What's your thought on this whole idea of unity?
Well, I think when unity becomes a euphemism for do everything I say and we'll get along just fine, we've got big problems. And that's the way some people have been treating that word and that concept. The reality, the stark reality, Rick, I've been at this for 25 years. I was pretty young when I started. I'm not so young anymore. Now I got a gray beard. But the stark reality is we began to experience disunity within the North Dakota Republican Party when people started to disregard the will of the delegates at our convention. And I gave Kevin Cramer's nominating speech in 2014, as critical as I was of him for that decision in 2012. And we were able to unite as a party again and coalesce in support behind him for U.S. House and ultimately Senate. But that's the problem. The problem isn't we have too many people that are too adherent to our platform. Our platform should absolutely unite us, and we shouldn't celebrate the fact that we have such a tremendous breadth of ideological diversity in our party that we don't even really have a party anymore. When we have a big tent, I'm all for a big tent, but I think there also has to be some parameters. So our platform is what we should celebrate. Our platform is what should unite us. Our convention is what should bring us together in support of candidates. And after the convention, we should present a united front going into the primary. But the fact is, we're not doing that because people are treating this open primary as a kind of second chance at the nomination to go out and get anyone and everyone, spend as much money as you want to get behind me and support me, and then expect for us to unite post-primary. But the reality is, and you said it earlier, and you can't say it enough, the Republican Party of North Dakota is a private organization. We are sovereign. We operate under our own rules. If we endorse a candidate, that is the Republican candidate. If someone challenges that Republican candidate, that's not the Republican candidate. That's a challenger to the Republican candidate. Unity requires us to adhere to our platform, and it requires us to respect the delegates and the results of the convention and move forward together. Can we all agree on that?
Amen.
Oh man, I'm in 100% agreement. The big tent word, I hate big tent word. To me, the size of the tent is determined by the platform. And if you don't fit in that tent, there's another party for you. I have no problem with that. I'd like to move on to candidate qualifications. That was another proposal that changed, and I don't know the ins and outs of it. I do know that it required a pay or play component. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened there?
Well, there was a discussion, and it was interesting because there was a long discussion about Democrats infiltrating our process through the primary. And one of the proposals in that was that someone cannot have sought the endorsement of an alternate political party within the last 10 years. So from people who allegedly aren't concerned about Democrats voting in our primary, they apparently are concerned about Democrats running as Republicans, or maybe they were just giving us a little at that point. But the big part of that proposal was if you want to call it pay to play, that's fine. Fees put in place to participate and stand nomination for our convention. Now, I would like to, but it would have been out of order, but I would like to have moved that one of the criteria for standing nomination for at the convention would be that you pledge to adhere to the results of the convention. That seems elementary.
Yes.
If you're not going to adhere to the results of the convention, you don't have any business participating in it and exploiting the work that the Republican Party has done, bringing 2,000 of the most ardent Republicans together in the same room that you can speak to. So if you don't make that pledge, I don't know why you're here. But what we did instead is we put fees in place. Now, there was a proposal from Chairman Nygren from District 25 to reduce those fees that I supported, but we didn't have enough votes in the room to get that amendment passed. And ultimately, it went forward with higher fees, beginning at $5,000 for Senate and gubernatorial candidates. I believe it's $3,500 for House candidates, and I think
$2,500. I thought it was
$2,500,
yeah,
and then
so.
$1,500 for the other statewide candidates, and $0 for National Committee man and National Committee woman, because as we all know, that's a volunteer position that costs. Right. It doesn't pay. But at the end of the day, that's what was adopted. Nothing that's been done can't be undone. We'll see how this works in this next convention cycle. I think those fees are prohibitive. I think they're way too high if we have to have fees at all. I understand skin in the game. I think that those fees should have been treated as a lottery with the winning candidate taking the pot at the end of the discussion, not the party taking the pot. But that's all nuanced. And I think going forward, they're in place. We're going to have them for this convention, and we're going to see how it works out.
I'm going to correct something. The original one was $2,500. If they moved it up to $3,500, that was in my absence. So I'm going to take that back because I was not there to hear the final vote on that one.
I could be wrong too, but I know they changed it because congressmen are up every 2 years, where senators are only up every 6 years. So they didn't want to put such a burden on congressmen.
But this is a good example. To me, this isn't a huge deal. I mean, I think it is somewhat prohibitive, but I think this is very illustrative of the mindset for some of these proposals. It's a knee-jerk reaction because they don't want to be embarrassed. And I've heard this from the party leaders. They don't want to be embarrassed by people that are coming up to be endorsed who aren't legitimate candidates, which galls me. I mean, it's amazing to say. So you put this in place. What you're going to not have Charles Tuttle come up? what does that save the party? It shuts someone down that a lot of people support, and it saves you 10 minutes in the convention.
Yeah, well,
so
and
you
I
alienate people.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I can't say that we're not going to see Charles Tuttle there. There's nothing saying that he won't put the money in and show up. But I think rather than being concerned about whether or not we're embarrassed by candidates that compete for our votes at the convention, we should be proud of the candidates that we endorse and send forward to the primary. If we could just unite behind those candidates, a lot of this divisiveness, a lot of this rancor within the party would dissipate real quick. All we need is for our governor and our statewide officers to say, these are our candidates. They were endorsed by our delegates. We are all behind them. We all wholeheartedly endorse them. We'll get our party behind them. We'll put money and time and resources and energy behind those candidates and move forward. Yep. All of these problems would be solved by that. How hard is that?
Right. Don't rig the system.
Yep.
And then we can all agree to support the outcome of the system,
right,
as long as it's not rigged.
They always say, let the chips fall where they may, and that seems to be out the window. There is no chips falling where they may.
I've got one more question for you on some of these proposals, and that's resolution. So there's the platform of the party, and then there's resolutions, which sort of are, I guess, a furtherance of what we stand for. Now, that changed too. We only have 30 seconds, John. Tell us a little bit about that and what that means.
So what happened in a nutshell is that the resolutions committee got pared down to be quite small compared to what it used to be. It used to be one representative from each of the 47 districts, an appointee of the House Majority Leader, an appointee of the Senate Majority Leader. That would be our committee. It would be a very vigorous debate, but now that's been pared down. The resolutions report will go to the state committee. The state committee can vote to pass it on to the delegates, or by 2/3 majority, they can pluck resolutions out of there.
Gotcha. So again, I'm going to repeat it. It coalesces power to the status quo, to the establishment, and that's not good for the state of North Dakota or the Republican Party.